Today, myself Ashna is here to talk about the book The Great Leaders of the World, written by Paramjit Arora. And I'm here to talk about Mahatma Gandhi. The name of Mahatma Gandhi is a name that makes every Indian sit up with a pride and a name that is revered the world over, for he is a man who fought for the equality of the human race. His non-violent struggle for the Indian independence, which ultimately made India a liberated nation, is legendary. Mahatma Gandhi is aptly called the father of nation. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born in Porbandar, Gujarat on October 2, 1869. He was the son of Karamchand Gandhi, the divine chief minister of Porbandar, and Putli Bai, Karamchand's fourth wife. Gandhi graduated as a lawyer from the University College London. He was admitted to a British bar in 1891 and soon after returned to India to set up his law practice in Mumbai. His law practice did not thrive and therefore he took up a position of legal advisor in the large Indian law firm, which posted him in Durban, South Africa. When Gandhi reached Durban, he saw that non-whites were given discriminated treatment and even the most of basics of liberties were not available to them. Indians and blacks were treated as inferior races and meted out the worst treatment. Once he was thrown out of the first class carriage of the train in spite of holding a first class ticket, as a first class compartment was reserved for the whites. He retailed by protesting and demanding basic rights for the Indians and other non whites in the country. Gandhi's well-wisher implored him to return back to India, but he stayed on as he wanted to make a difference for the Indian community that was suffering oppression in the hands of the British impartial during the country. Gandhi stayed on in the South Africa for a period of 20 years. It was for him a period of marred by the physical and mental abuse, bigotry and imprisonment. He hit back at the whites not with the weapons or hostility but with his policy of non-violence and non-cooperation. Gandhi's ideas stemmed from his utmost belief in writings of Count Leo Tolstoy, and he also drew inspiration from the teachings of Jesus Christ and an American writer called Henry David Thoreau, whose most noteworthy book was Civil Disobedience. Gandhi, however, believed that his struggle was much deeper and intense and therefore created a term called Satyagraha, which meant truth and firmness. To describe his struggle, the paramount belief in Satyagraha was something that propelled him to the great victories throughout the Gandhi's life. Gandhi also participated in the Boer War, where he formed an ambulance unit to aid the wounded soldiers of the British Army. After the Boer War, he continued to campaign the Indian rights in South Africa. Gandhi's efforts were finally rewarded when in 1914 the government of South Africa acceded to his demand, in part allowing legalization of the Indian marriages and abolition of the poll tax. Gandhi decided to return back to his beloved home country and participate in the Indian freedom struggle, which was beginning to gain momentum. He was 45 years old. Back home, Gandhi was painfully aware of the similar situation in India, where the British had oppressed Indians for many years in their own homeland. He started propagating the concept of satyagraha and launched his non-violence movement against the British. In 1919, the British passed the Rowlatt Act to deal with the heavy hand if any revolutionary act was committed against the British. Thousands of Indians protested against this act and were massacred mercilessly by the British forces. In retaliation, much violence was unleashed against the British, but Gandhi persevered with his own non-violence movement. The power of his campaign was gaining ground and more Indians joined hands with him. Indians working in public office began to resign courts of law and were officiated by the British were boycotted, and Indian children studying in government schools were withdrawn. Streets were blocked by the Indians who refused to move even when they were showered with a lethal beating from the police. Gandhi's voice was the beginning to unite all the Indians against the British colonization. Gandhi was arrested but had to be released immediately as the British feared mass violence. Once out of jail, Gandhi committed his tirade against the British and with renewed vigor and launched the Swaraj self-ruling movement. He demanded economic independence for the India, which involved the exploitation of the British goods from the Indian market. As a result, many bonfires were organized throughout the country, where millions of Indians burned British-made clothes and other items and started wearing the homespun khadi. Gandhi believed that British exploitation had led to poverty-stricken conditions in Indian villages and therefore encouraged cottage industries to manufacture traditional Indian goods. He also started using the spinning wheel, which symbolized the advent of the Indian goods. Gandhi's name was becoming synonymous with the impartial struggle for a free India. He was well known for his simple and saintly life, full of prayer and fasting and meditation. He abstained from the earthly pleasures and lived on fruits, vegetables, and goat's milk. He advocated ahimsa to one and all and firmly believed that this was the root of India's emancipation from the tyranny of the British rule. People from around the world began to respect this undying faith, and he became to be known as Mahatma, a great soul. In 1921, the India National Congress acknowledged Gandhi's ceaseless struggle and gave him complete executive authority. However, immediately after, there were a series of brutal acts against the British in various parts of the country, and Gandhi was disillusioned and he publicly announced that his civil disobedience movement was a failure. Seizing the opportunity, the British government arrested him in 1922. He was jailed for 2 years for his propaganda against the British rule. When he was released, he withdrew from the active politics. He, however, continued his campaign for a communal immunity. In 1930, the struggle for independence was gaining momentum and Gandhi was pulled into it again. He launched a new campaign for civil disobedience and urged the Indian people to avoid paying taxes on salt, which was recently enforced by the British government. The famous Dandi March was organized where multitudes of Indians followed Gandhi from Ahmedabad to Aryamansi, where they made salt by evaporating seawater. This created a huge wave across the country, and patriotic failure reached a new height. Gandhi was arrested once again but released in 1931 itself. In 1932, the civil disobedience movement was relaunched and Gandhi was arrested yet again. When in jail, he began a fast onto death to protest against the discrimination meted out to the Hindu untouchables. The fast and Gandhi undertook were highly effective measures against the British. In 1934, Gandhi resigned from the politics and was replaced by Jawaharlal Nehru as the leader of the Congress Party. Gandhi traveled throughout the length of breadth of the country spreading the message of non-violence and seeking to abolish the untouchability that existed in many parts. His popularity was granted the limited home rule policy, which allowed Indians some amount of power and participation. This was not implemented until Gandhi approved it. In 1939, Gandhi entered the active politics again. He fasted again, this time to the forced ruler of Rajkot to modify his autocratic rule that was derogatory towards the Indians. There was a huge public unrest and support of his past, and Gandhi power rebuilt once again. The British government acceded and his demands were met. Mahatma Gandhi became the most important political figurehead in India. In 1939, World War II broke out and Gandhi seized his opportunity to demand independence from the British. He offered his party support only if complete freedom was promised. The British rejected his offer and arrested him in 1942. He was released in 1944 because of his failing health. By then, the British government had decided to grant independence to the India only if the Congress party resolved the differences with the powerful Muslim League headed by M.A. Jinnah. Jinnah was demanding partition, which Gandhi vehemently opposed, but in time he gave in with the realization that peace would prevail only if the partition took place. After years of struggle, India became a free country and Indians began to taste the wonderful air of the freedom. Thank you one and all who are listening this.